USCHO.com.
Welcome to USCHO Weekend Review for Wednesday, September 28th, 2022, where each week we look back at the highlights of the weekend and the news of the week. But today we'll look back at the news of the summer and a little bit of a preview of this upcoming season. This podcast is sponsored by DCU, Digital Federal Credit Union. What will DCU mean to you? Find out today by visiting dcu.org. Membership required. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. And first of all, howdy, gentlemen. It's good to catch back up and get this rolling again for the new season.
We're back by popular demand, at least for another year. I don't know what I got to do this year. Oh, wait, I'll get 30 players, I'll schedule, equipment, everything, and do this podcast with you.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to be back in schools. It's good to have you for one more season. It's nice to know that your program is back and ready to get back on the ice next year, but at least we benefit from that 1 year organizational time, I guess we'll say. For you, it's our benefit and the listeners' benefit as well.
Why don't we jump right in to the preseason poll? Denver, number one, 37 of the 50 possible first place votes. A lot of times last year's national champion will be picked as number one in the first poll just because people don't know a whole lot what's going on. But is this justified, or is this just, as I said, credit for getting that national title?
Maybe a little bit of each. You know, I think this is going to be a good Denver team again. Do I think it's the best team in the country? I mean, just looking at my ballot itself, I'd say no, because I think I had Denver number three. My number one was Minnesota. I look at that Minnesota team as one where a lot of guys intentionally returned because they felt like they had a lot of unfinished business. They believe that they can win a national championship together, and they have a lot of players coming back. There's goods and bads to that. We saw that with Michigan last year. They came, a lot of players returned thinking we'll be a powerhouse, and they were, but you still have to win the games. And when it, push games to shove, Michigan didn't get it done in the Frozen Four. So I guess I think that Minnesota should be a predominant favorite across the country. They brought so much talent back, but at the same time, we'll see. It's one of those things. You still have to play the games. You still have to play it out.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jimmy. We're going to start off a year with agreement for once. Contrary to everybody's popular opinion, we do get along. So I agree with you. I think a lot of it is because of what happened last year. And I do think that a lot of people say to be the man, you have to beat the man. And right now, Denver's the man. So why not start them off at number one and see where it goes? I mean, as far as my number one, I'm going to agree with you. I think Minnesota. Minnesota obviously has pretty much most of the talent returning. They've got a really good goaltender. Got the end of the year experience. They've got incoming freshman Logan Schooley, just to say one name, and go from there. I mean, Bob did a great job last year. Probably a little surprising at the end, but I think it's Minnesota right now as the number one. I've got a dark horse too that people, if I would add a vote, I would have had him up there higher than what the poll had. I think you can't overlook Quinnipiac. Quinnipiac's one that I think got a little bit, is going to have the experience of going pretty far. The disappointment of losing to Michigan last year. I think they're a dark horse right there as well.
You mentioned Bob Motzko, both of you picking Minnesota. I was struck in the post-game press conference after their loss in the Frozen Four to Minnesota State that there was kind of a bitterness and anger and maybe something that Bob Motzko personally might carry forward from that. I had not seen him quite so pointed as he was in that press conference. Even kind of references to Minnesota State being kind of grizzled and an older team. But it seems like there's a little fire in the belly for the head coach there, too.
Well, I mean, Bob went through a big year, both personally and professionally. Had a good team, lost his goaltender, found a way to right the ship. he's a very good coach. He's won World Junior Championships, and I think right now you got to look at him as one of the premier coaches, one of the name coaches that you talk about the Mount Rushmore of coaches all time. He's not there all time, but currently he'd be on the Mount Rushmore if you could go in a 5 to 10 year period because of how much he's won at Minnesota. And they never rebuild there. They reload. And to get a high draft pick like Logan Cooley and just to continue to do that, I could see them having a little chip on their shoulder and a little bit of a, I want to say piss and vinegar. I'm not sure if I could say that on a podcast. That's, I guess we can. I just did.
You can say anything in the podcast.
I just did. So we'll go with that. But I think they've got a little bit of an attitude right now. And sometimes that's good.
Yeah. And I think, Derek, Bob Motzko, you kind of pointed out, he's a winner. He wins wherever he goes. And I think that it hasn't been as quick of an acceleration to championship that I think even Bob Motzko himself wants. He believes that he can win a national championship every year at Minnesota. And I think that everybody that actually, knows about that program believes the same thing. You can, as you said, you don't have to, rebuild. You just reload. You just keep bringing in some great freshmen. Logan Cooley, a great example. But I just look at Bob Motzko as such a winner that when he does not win, it does put that fire in the belly. And I think that will be what really, especially I want to see this team early on. We know what early season hockey does. It's rough. It's much less refined. You have some skilled teams. Can you be skilled right out of the gate? I think that the confidence, building some early confidence for this Minnesota team will be really important.
Well, Derek already mentioned a dark horse for him with Quinnipiac.
I just meant as a number one, Ed. I just meant as a number one. I didn't mean a national champion.
All right. But dark horse is a number one. We're talking some dark horse teams. Quinnipiac has been to the big dance before a couple of times under Rand Pecknold. Of course, they haven't been anywhere under anybody else. He's been the only guy there for 25 years or something now.
Yep.
More than that now. But there are some teams that need to be part of the national conversation that may get overlooked. One team that was overlooked a bit last year was Denver, and the season turned out pretty well for them. Are there some teams that we should be watching right now who are going to creep their way into the conversation that we have been ignoring or might ignore this year?
I think we didn't see a lot of respect early in the first polls for a team that right up by 91 from Quinnipiac, UConn. I mean, that's a team that got right to the edge last year. They were an overtime goal away from winning their first Hockey East championship. They balanced their year really well. They didn't start off fast. They got better. They continued to be a great team. And in the playoffs, they were fantastic. And I'll tell you, if they had gotten into the NCAA tournament, they were so built to win. So I look at that team. They lost some key components, but if they can do what we just talked about, Derek, and reload and have I know they have a pretty impressive freshman class coming in. They do the right things here. And I wouldn't be surprised to see UConn start what could become a tradition of being toward the top of Hockey East every year and in that national conversation.
I guess I don't know. Can you count North Dakota as we don't really, they got picked fourth, but
yes.
Have people been talking much about them? We talk about Denver. Yeah.
Not enough.
I guess that's another one that I'm baffled a little bit by, because North Dakota is North Dakota. And they do have good players. And they do have the ability to go out and win at the end. So I think, you're going with Denver and you're going with Minnesota out west. Don't forget about the fighting, I almost said Fighting Sioux, but Fighting Hawks up in Grand Forks.
Another team I don't think we should overlook that could have gone into the Frozen Four, came very close, is Notre Dame. Maybe they have a few things to sort out, but it seems to me that Jeff Jackson always has that team ready. I think that they could battle Minnesota in the Big Ten, and maybe you could see them go pretty far in the postseason.
I think they lost a lot, though. That's my one concern. Lost a lot, to the NHL, some to graduation. I believe they had some freshmen that maybe even didn't end up coming. Talking to their broadcaster, Darren Pritchett, over the offseason, I said I was surprised that they didn't get as much respect in the poll. And he said, well, I think people realize that they don't have as much, but I don't ever put it past Jeff Jackson either. He has put together many great teams when people did not have high expectations for his club. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them in the picture. Another team I want to mention too, that, I said UConn, and maybe I'm a little Hockey East heavy here, but Devin Levi returning to Northeastern makes Northeastern a real contender. I mean, he was the best goaltender in the country last year. And, he's back with something to prove. He feels that he missed his entire freshman year. Then last year, whatever you want to call it, a redshirt freshman year, sophomore year, whatever you want to, however you want to put the moniker on, he is ready, I think, to maybe become the backbone, the ultimate goaltender in college hockey. He wants to break all the records, and he can do it.
There's some other teams that probably are going to be in the mix as the season goes by that we haven't mentioned. Certainly Minnesota State, although they lose Dryden McKay, they'll do some rebuilding. Pat Ferschweiler got an extension at Western Michigan. He did a terrific job with that team. There are also teams out there to kind of watch, maybe in the CCHA, Michigan Tech, somebody to keep an eye on. We didn't mention Harvard. They were picked second in the ECAC behind Quinnipiac. Those are a few other teams out there to keep an eye on. And there's always the wild card, so to speak, of Arizona State. So at this time of year, it's really wide open, and you can probably make a case for about 25 of the 60 some odd teams playing this year for the postseason in the NCAAs.
I mean, you got Arizona State opening a new building. They got a really good transfer class coming in, and I think that'll be a big, boost for their program. And new building, they're going to get start getting some top end. Why wouldn't you want to play in front of a packed house of 6,000 seats in Tempe, Arizona? Also the home of the Phoenix, Arizona Coyotes too.
Yeah, temporary home, I think you have to call it, right?
Yeah, for like 3 years though, with no other building in sight yet.
Yeah.
But I think you got them, and then you got another one that was just on the cusp of having a good year. And I haven't done enough research on them, but Ohio State was really good for a while. And I think they were the bubble team out, or they were one of the bubble teams out. I don't know. There's just something that they haven't won a lot there, but they're so close. And they had Steve Miller was there as a great recruiter and brought in some really good classes, and JB Bittner was there. And now Luke Strand coming in after winning a Clark Cup championship in the USHL. There's something when I look at the poll, there's something that pops out at me beside at Ohio State too.
Yeah. And that was a team that, defied low expectations last year. They were picked last in the Big Ten, and they were very, I think, determined all season long to prove that they were a better team. And, they made a run for the Big Ten regular season championship, if we all remember. And then, as you did mention there, Derek, they were just on the bubble of the NCAA tournament. I do feel like as coaching has evolved there, they have done a fantastic job of bringing in great assistants, as you mentioned. So I think that we do have to keep an eye on the Buckeyes.
Well, we've got a lot more to talk about in this episode, including some major coaching changes at blue chip schools, possible new conference, and also some rule changes that happened in the offseason. And I'll give you a hint. We didn't talk about Michigan in the Big Ten, but we will talk about them in the next segment. This is USCHO Weekend Review, sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org.
Sometimes it's not about wanting a new car, it's about needing one. And I needed one I could rely on. So I got an auto loan with DCU. They offer the same low rates on both new and used cars, and I was able to borrow a little extra to make a used car as good as new. My auto loan from DCU means a ride I can finally rely on, which feels like a pretty big thing. What will DCU mean to you? Insured by NCUA. Membership required. Visit dcu.org.
We're back with USCHO Weekend Review. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. In the offseason, 4 big-name schools had coaching changes. Some were expected, some were not expected, and some took quite a while to happen. The one that was expected was Boston College, as Jerry York soon after the offseason announced his retirement. What kind of a program, Jim, is Greg Brown inheriting at Boston College? Maybe a program that was a step back the last couple of years, comes in as an alum with experience with the program. What can we look for at BC?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not too far removed from a pretty great BC team 2 years ago that just didn't get the things done in the postseason. They lost in the Hockey East semifinals and then didn't advance through the regional. They lost their one game in the regional to St. Cloud State, if I remember right. But I think that Greg Brown is really going to be, putting a stamp on a program that's going to look a lot like Jerry York's teams. Greg Brown was his associate head coach for a number of years. Did a great job there, won championships, was involved with some of the best BC teams ever. So, there's not going to be a surprise if the teams look a little similar to what Jerry York accomplished, but I do think he'll put his own spin on the program. You have to as a head coach. You can't just try to repeat. You're not the same person no matter what. So I think you'll end up seeing what should be a pretty successful program. And recruiting shouldn't be a problem. It never has been at Boston College. It won't be going forward, I don't think, even without Jerry York as the bench boss. I think, Greg Brown has a great reputation throughout not just college hockey, but all of hockey. Great experience with Team USA. He's had some pro experience. I mean, this is a guy that if you're sending your sons there, they're going to get a good education. They're going to be in a good school, and they're going to be playing for a good coach. So I think that Greg Brown will have a lot of success at Boston College.
I think we're talking about the blue bloods of college hockey, all changing head coaches and bitter rivals too. Michigan, Michigan State, BU, BC. Getting 4 new bench bosses on all of those, I think that's pretty impressive too. And first of all, 3 of those 4 didn't make the NCAA tournament, and that's a surprise. I mean, that's a down year for those programs, and you can see in the polls that they all got respect a little bit. Michigan State's getting some really good players on the recruiting trail, and Adam Nightingale, coming from the U.S. program, has a direct line to those U.S. programs. One goalie that was committed to Michigan switched to Michigan State. I mean, you're going to see this is going to, with new coaches, you're going to see new rivalries form. You're not going to have the old Jerry York, Jack Parker, Ron Mason, Red Berenson. These are new, young, energetic coaches that are going to try to rebuild these programs. And Michigan, why you don't have to rebuild it because they're of what they accomplished on the ice, what happened off the ice, they've got to rebuild the culture a little bit. And, you mentioned how long that job took. That's something that you shake your head at and wonder why that took so long. But Brandon Naturo has been out on the road recruiting. I've seen him out a couple times and trying to rebuild the culture. And these are 4 proud programs I don't think are going to be down for a while. I mean, these are, like I said, the blue bloods of college hockey.
Yeah, I'll go back to Boston University and bringing in Jay Pandolfo. He was in there last year as an assistant or associate head coach, which probably was kind of the writing on the wall for Albie O'Connell. But this is a program. Let's not forget that for 40 years had Jack Parker behind the bench, and I think that they are looking to return to somebody that will be that Jack Parker again. And is Jay Pandolfo the right guy? I mean, you had David Quinn, you had Albie O'Connell, 2 great guys, 2 good coaches, but David Quinn wanted to take the step up to the NHL, and he's now back in the NHL out in San Jose. And you have Albie was an established assistant, So now you've got Jay Pandolfo, who had a long NHL career. He coached the Bruins for a number of years, was a great player back in the mid-90s, won the national championship in 95. You feel like he will have a great influence on this program. But I know that program and that school and everybody, the alumni, they want the next Jack Parker, somebody that will stay there for a good portion of their lives. Is Jay Pandolfo that guy? I'm not sure. But he's going to get the chance to be that guy if he wants. That is, it's going to be a personal decision probably, but he is in a position, if he wins and has success, he can keep his contract extending over and over again. He will have a lot of love of the alums there.
The rumor mills that went on with those four all summer long kept you entertained. We could have a show a week about what the rumor of who was going where and who was going to BU, who flew in, who got offered what. I mean, in the coaching circles, that was the big talk for most of the summer. And one by one, they got knocked off by guys that you would say, okay, I can see that one. There was no outside the box hires. You got Pandolfo, who was there. You got Brown, who was there. You got Nightingale, who's an alum. You got Naurato, who was there as well. So of all the rumors, and everybody saw it on the internet, that who is going where, nobody really moved.
Yeah.
And these are part of proud cultures, proud alums. So I think you're going to see a little different spin put on each program by somebody who's got a vested interest in the program.
Yes, and Nate Lehman is still in Providence. I mean,
I wasn't going to throw names out, Jimmy.
Has there been a coach who has been rumored to leave a school more than Nate Lehman? He's back at Providence.
Eric Lang's right there.
Eric Lang, yeah, I was going to say Eric Lang. He's the first one that's named everywhere.
So I wasn't going to throw names out. Some of these great coaches immediately. I've heard Nate Lehman's name thrown around for 5 NHL jobs.
I keep looking for my name. I can't find my name being thrown around for these jobs.
Talking about the two Western teams in the rivalry there, Michigan State, Adam Nightingale not only building a new staff and a new culture, but they've built him essentially a new Munn Ice Arena out there too. And I saw some of the photos from that. Looks fantastic. That's kind of a necessity for a program at that level. But culture, again, you mentioned it for Michigan, Derek, rebuilding a culture. And it sounds to me, I was thinking about this today. It seems like maybe culture and maybe even some locker room issues were some things kind of under the surface there for the Wolverines. And maybe this is a change that can get them over the hump. It certainly is a non-risk type of hire for Michigan. It was very late in the offseason when Naurato was hired as interim. I guess it's interim, right? It's a 1-year contract right now. It's a no-brainer. If he's successful, you give him the extension. If he's not successful, you've had some time to plan ahead. But from what I'm hearing from Michigan, it's a different atmosphere. He's a coach the players really liked. It may be the kind of a opening the window and getting a little fresh air in that the program needed after all the controversy in the offseason.
I think you said it well. I mean, I think everybody's who's listening's probably read the report, read the articles, and I think you just said you hit the nail on the head there, Ed. I mean, I don't know what much more you can beat that up. It got beat up pretty bad all summer, but I think they're going to be a good team this year. I think they're going to be somebody to watch out for, as does the people who vote in the polls.
Yeah, I agree with that. But, it was a black eye. This was a black eye on a very proud, dominant program. And, people, I talked to our good friend Jess Myers, who's well respected in the college hockey world as a longtime journalist. And right after Mel Pearson was let go, and we both kind of had the same reaction of, we really liked Mel, great guy. We always got along with him, was always good with his time to the media and stuff, but you don't understand sometimes what's happening behind the scenes. And I'm not going to stomp on a man's grave. But I think that Michigan was forced into doing the right thing, and they did. It took a long time, and I know that they wanted to go through a process, and that's, I live out in Boston, and we have the Boston Celtics right now, who just went through a very similar long process, and right before the beginning of the season had to make a coaching change. So these changes happen. I'm glad that the process is what guided Michigan when everything came to the end. I hope that this is a program that can get back to the listen. They're a good team on the ice, but they've got to be good citizens off the ice. Everybody involved in that program. So hopefully this will be a step in the right direction.
I want to drop a real quick one in here before we talk about rules. Are we going to see a new conference soon? College hockey has been landlocked at around 60 teams for the past 20 years or so. Atlantic Hockey was the last new league to be established, and it's celebrating its 20th anniversary this season. Stonehill College is going to elevate its programs to Division I. You've got schools like LIU and Lindenwood, the new one in Augustana. You've got Arizona State that hasn't had a league. You've got the Alaska schools. There have been some discussions, and it sounds like there may be at least a scheduling alliance and maybe even a new league, a men's version of the NUHA for women, with mostly Division II schools playing Division I level hockey. Will the other Northeast 10 schools come along? Will we see an influx of 8 or 10 teams into D1 hockey?
Well, there's got to be a home for them. I think that you talked about all the independents there. I think they're doing a loose scheduling agreement. I know that there was a conference call amongst them this summer to talk about that. Obviously, Arizona State is got a new building. They need to get dates. I think they're all playing there. I think Arizona State's got something like 22 or 23 home games with all the Big Ten teams coming back to them from that one year they played the whole year on the road. So I think that there is an appetite for it. I think you read the article, I guess it was in Albany, Union Times Leader, was it, about the New Hell teams and any 10 teams that are trying to be put together as a new conference. I think there's an appetite for it. I think there's a need for it. And it'd be great for college hockey. I think you get some new schools, and if you look at basketball, you're talking a boatload of schools, but there's a lower end, a mid-major, and then the Power Five. Here, we just got kind of everybody thrown together. And if you could start increasing rivalries and getting some new teams in, I think that would be very beneficial for the growing of the sport.
And Ed, you mentioned the start of Atlantic Hockey, 20 years ago, but that goes actually back to a scheduling alliance. It was the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference. All came together in the old New Haven Coliseum, which is no longer even exists. But that was about 1996 or so. That all of the athletic directors and Rich Enzor, who's still, I believe, the commissioner of that all sport conference, and they figured out a way that they would just. These were schools as Division II was really being eliminated from the college hockey landscape. They were going to come together in a Division I sense. And that's almost what we have here again. You have teams in that Northeast 10, like St. Anselm and Franklin Pierce and Southern New Hampshire University. I believe all of them, maybe Stonehill. They've been playing as a 4-team conference for a number of years. There's not a lot of incentive. There's no NCAA tournament for these teams. So it would basically elevate a lot of these programs to Division I. Now, the one interesting issue that goes along with this is that the NCAA doesn't allow just one sport to play up anymore. That you used to be able to just take one of your sports if you're a Division II school and play at the Division I level. You can't do that anymore. So all of these programs would have to then elevate their entire athletic program. So you might see some of these schools go along. You might not see all of them go along. That's where the teams like an LIU or Lindenwood that's looking for a conference might end up joining just to get some sort of an ability to have more than 4 or 5 teams. You want to get that 6 number, but you really want to get 8, to be a safe conference, because the NCAA doesn't recognize you as a conference if you have less than 6 teams at the Division I level. So there's a lot of work left to be done. I know that having talked to him this summer, Bob DiGregorio is trying to help spearhead this, but he's getting close to retirement himself. This is supposed to be his last year with Atlantic Hockey, so we'll see where this goes. I think that maybe not by next year, but within the next 3 years, will have some sort of an elevation of a number of these programs. And I wouldn't be surprised at that point to maybe see what will be at 70 Division I men's teams. That is an interesting point alone, because then you might be able to expand the NCAA tournament to maybe 17 or 18 teams, where you end up with a play-in round like you do in the basketball tournament.
Well, Jim, there is an ability for these teams to play at the D1 level because there's no D2 national championship. So like the women, many of these schools are going to be able to have that and be in that league. One of the schools talking about that and elevating its program to be able to do that is Utica.
Yeah, Utica has talked about it numerous times. They actually hosted the Atlantic Hockey Final Four there this year. One of the things that an interesting part of the D2 talk that you had there is D1 teams can play those D2 teams, and those games count. Those games count in your standings. They count in the stats. They count. So they can play up. So it can be done a lot easier with the D2s than D3s and so forth. So there are different scheduling quirks that allow for things like that to happen. Like Stonehill's playing LIU twice this year. I still think you have to get, for the national tournament, you have to get to 20 games. But I know that you have to get to 20 games. I don't think that Stonehill's getting 20 games this year, but they are playing a lot of those teams that you mentioned that could potentially move up. Where does Utica fit in the mix? We'll find out, because they could end up being independent as well. And Atlantic Hockey, whether they kick the can down the road, I think the most important thing, everybody always assumes Atlantic Hockey should take the next team. Why does everybody always assume that? And it wasn't surefire that we were going to get back in Atlantic Hockey, because everybody likes that even number. So why should you take that one extra team, other than obviously to help grow the game? But it also, there are other teams that got to step up too as well. And other conferences need to step up. So I think, back to the original point, getting a new conference helps all those teams. And we talked about it. We talked about the Frozen Four. I think it's always assumed that Atlantic Hockey needs to take all these teams. Why can't another conference take some teams as well?
And I want to wrap this part of the show talking just briefly about what you brought up. Atlantic Hockey has been trying very hard to be more competitive out of conference and needs to get about to 400 or better in non-conference record. And I was just doing some math in my head while we were talking about it. If every team in the league won one more non-conference game, it would get them there. So it's not that far away. They don't, as a league, want to do something that's going to hurt that. And I think part of the impetus behind that has been the commissioner, Bob DiGregorio, has talked about needing to get more competitive out of conference. So, yeah, your point is well taken. A new league lets new people in and doesn't harm anybody that's already been working hard to be more competitive. But I want to turn to our last topic for this first podcast of the season, first of our fifth season of Weekend Review, and that is rule changes in the off season. And Derek, before we got started, you mentioned everybody thought video was going to be lessened with the new rules, but you think maybe the opposite might happen.
Well, I wasn't involved in a lot of the discussions at the conference level because I didn't have a vote on stuff for this year. But when I saw it come out, I was expecting it to go to a challenge into a penalty. I think everybody wanted to lessen video, more refereeing on the ice. Well, in my opinion, and I have talked to some coaches who believe the same thing and some don't. And Jimmy, we talked about this before the show. I think the first, our rule right now last year was the first challenge, you lose your timeout. If you lose your timeout or use your timeout, you can't challenge anything from there on. Now it's the same as it was. If you use your challenge and are wrong, or you had used your timeout, you can challenge the first time. You also now can challenge a second time, but it becomes a penalty. So we're technically, if you don't care about the penalty and you're down by 2 and you believe something and you really need that goal or you need that major, or you need something, you're adding another video challenge into the mix. And I think it's going to end up going the other way instead of, I think that people are they don't care about their timeout. All coaches have said that. They'll challenge all the time for their timeout. You got in between periods, you got media timeouts, you got everything. Nobody really cares about that timeout.
And you get your timeout back if you go to overtime.
And you get another timeout back. Exactly. So I think it's going to add more length to it. And I think we're going to go, why did we just add more timeouts when we had talked about it? We all talked about it at the Frozen Four after day one. The over-under on video timeouts per day. I think it was 8 in the first day was the over-under that we talked about in the press box.
It stayed low though.
Yeah, it did. It stayed like at 4, you know.
Yeah, might have even been low. But Derek, there was one thing I remember. I don't know if it was you at the Frozen Four, but it was a coach at the Frozen Four that I said, why can't we just go straight to the NHL rule, as you just alluded to? If you miss it, you miss a challenge, it's automatically a penalty. The timeout's out of there. There's no timeout provision in the NHL. And one thing that continuously was brought up to me, and it was coaches that did so, they said, in the NHL, at least you have an iPad on the bench that you can look at and make the decision, should we challenge or should we not? College, that wasn't allowed. In all the coverage I saw of this summer, I didn't see anything that says that technology is allowed on the bench. I ask you as a coach, we're still not allowed. There's still no provision to have any technology involved in this.
That's from what I understand. I have not seen it either. So I got the rules video. I watched the rules video. I don't need to watch it for this year. I'll watch everybody else play it out. But you're right. I don't think they added iPads to the bench.
And I think that is one reason that you still have that timeout in there, so that, okay, you can be wrong once and you don't get a penalty, because we really didn't give you the aid you need. I don't understand. I guess there's some sort of an NCAA wide provision about having technology used on benches in sports, but why? What's the big deal? I don't get that one. That is one of the things that just befuddles me. I didn't know that it was a rule until somebody brought it up at the Frozen Four last April. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I think one of the things that the reasoning behind it is, you've obviously got in the NHL, everybody's tied into the central camera. Everybody's tied into the replay. Everybody, if I bought a video system, I'm not going to spend the same as Ohio State or Penn State. Probably they're going to spend a little bit more. How does my camera tie into theirs? How do we get the feed? So there's a lot of different things. It's also the haves and have-nots as far as budget goes and what you can spend. Next thing you know, do I have to bring my own camera? Is there a spot in the press box for my own camera? There's a lot of questions on the technology. And I think when we've talked about it, those have been things that have been brought up. So maybe you're right. Maybe they kept the timeout in because they're not allowing technology. I just think you may have opened Pandora's box to more challenges.
No doubt.
Plus, the referee still can look at something if they want to anyway. So the referees still, if they believe that there's a goal scoring, they can still go in there.
I hope that the actual number of referee in like the challenges that are started by referees are reduced by this. I hope, and that was in the language, was that it was a hope that it would be the coaches that would be the impetus, not the referee. So hopefully the referees will officiate the game with their eyes and use the video only once the coaches bring it in. We'll see. We'll have to see on that. We'll see how that goes.
Here's the game that you play. The referee comes over and says, you bring him over and you go, hey, did you think that went in? And he would say, not sure. And then you'd stand there and you go, do you want to take a look at it? And he goes, well, do you want to use your challenge? And I'm like, well, you're the one on the goal. I want you to take a look. And then they'll go look at it. And you don't have to use your challenge. I don't know how many times I asked referees, did he just challenge that? Or are you looking at it on my own? And you got the pat on the chest and say, I'm looking at it on my own. It's a game within the game. And you have to, I think you're right. I would hope that this stops referees from going in on their own and forces a coach to use a challenge, because why wouldn't you always want them to look? Hey, I think that might have crossed the line. Can you go look at that? I mean, and they do. Yeah. And that's hence the over-under of 8 in day one of the Frozen Four on reviews.
I think they should give you all a red flag to throw out on the ice. That's more dramatic, like in the NFL. That would be fun.
They look at you and you hold it, you're dangling it and then throw it late.
Exactly. I think that could be a lot of fun. Before we wrap up, any other rule changes that are significant, or is it just a matter of tweaking a few things?
You want the wording on the one, don't you?
Well, the NHL, the offsides rule has now aligned with the NHL in that it used to be that your skate had to be on the ice in contact with the blue line to keep you onside. Now it is so that it has to be above the blue line, even though that they use the word over the blue line, as Ed pointed out in our conversation before the show. There's some wording that might be a little bit shady in there, but I think that is a good rule because you get into so much minutia with did his skate stay in contact. Hopefully now you'll be able to judge it a little bit better, faster, and you'll keep more plays on side. The only one thing I just want to mention with that I just happened to pick out as I was reading through the rule changes with the same offsides rules, they've also changed that. It used to be that once you got in, if you came in the zone offside and then you turned the puck over to the defense and then they turned it over back to you and you scored a goal, that goal would count because the other team possessed it. That wording has been taken out. And now if you enter the zone onside and you might stay in there for 2 minutes, both teams touching the puck, all of that sort of stuff. If you then score a goal, but the entry to the zone was offside, it's still an offside play. That actually goes back to the NHL rule as well. So it is a little, I mean, they're definitely trying to align with the NHL, but people might not have noticed that because there was so much talk about the blue line and whether the skate was in contact with the ice. That will be a rule that I guarantee comes into play multiple times this year when you have a puck, that stays in the zone for a minute. And next thing you know, you're going back a minute in tape, back a minute in a game because you've disallowed a goal. That'll be something we need to watch for.
And something to sit around and wait. Well, they take 8 minutes to look at it.
Well, I will tell you this. I think that confused people because it was like a penalty. You could have possessed the puck for like 1 second and that negated the offsides. So I think that confused people a little bit and confused referees even too. I think they would make some mistakes. The other one, the 5-minute major from checking from behind, you're not automatically ejected now. That's going to be a big one that's I think good. How many times have you seen, the guy turn their back? They don't really pummel them. They just kind of hit them and they get a 5 and the rest of that game, not a suspension. Now it could just be a 5. So there's that added into it. My hope is that people don't start pummeling people from behind because you've seen it. I've watched it in junior hockey the last 3 weeks. The lack of regard for player safety right now is at an all-time low, at least from the games I've seen in junior hockey. And I hope coaches do a good job of teaching their players a little bit better because I don't really believe, in junior hockey, it hasn't changed. I hope we don't get to the point where you see it in the NHL and you go, oh my God, and there's no penalty. I hope that doesn't happen in our game where people are taking more liberties in college hockey.
One last rule change I'll give you that we didn't bring up. We now know when a period in the game ends.
Yes.
For the first time in college hockey history, we now know when a game ends. And that, of course, goes back to last year's CCHA championship where the game was over and they realized the game-winning goal had gone in through the side of the net, not in through the actual net. But that no longer would be able to be reviewed as soon as the referees have left the ice at the end of a period or at the end of a game. The period or the game are now over. I think that is putting some definition in that was definitely needed.
And on that note, I'm leaving the podcast.
I think we'll let that be known from now on as the Don Lucia rule, correct?
I'm gone. I left the ice. It was over. You can't review it. No more video review.
Well, look for us on Mondays throughout the season, recapping the weekend and news of the previous week. This podcast has been sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. What will DCU mean to you? Find out today by visiting dcu.org. Membership required. You can find our podcast at uscho.com/podcasts or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We're available on Apple Podcasts, iHeart, Stitcher, Spreaker, and Spotify. For Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley, I'm Ed Trefzger, and this has been USCHO.com Weekend Review.